My name is Megan Whitlow from rural Kansas. They always said we were the perfect farm family, church on Sundays, smiles at the market, manners at the dinner table. But behind those closed doors on County Road 12, silence was survival, and love came with a price. I didn't just leave. I escaped. What if the people meant to love you the most were the ones who broke you? Stick around to hear how I escaped my family's lies, reclaimed my voice, and found freedom on my own terms. Subscribe for more true stories of survival and strength. Welcome back to the story. From the outside, our house looked like something off a postcard: white shutters, a wraparound porch, and a barn that glowed red in the late afternoon sun. It sat at the end of a long gravel road lined with wheat fields and sunflowers, where neighbors were few and secrets stayed buried. We were the Whitlows. Rick, Darla, Caleb, and me, Megan. People in town said we were the good kind of family. Church folks. Quiet. The type who brought Jell-O salad to potlucks and helped neighbors bale hay after a storm. They never saw the cracks. Inside that White House, things were different. Conversations at dinner were like tightrope walks. One wrong word and the whole evening shifted. My father, Rick, didn't raise his voice much, but when he did, the walls felt like they leaned in. He always started calm, always with that disappointed look that somehow cut deeper than yelling. My mom, Darla, rarely said what she meant. Her specialty was weaponized silence and those backhanded compliments that made you second-guess everything about yourself. And then there was Caleb, my older brother by 3 years and the son around which everything revolved. He was the star quarterback, the future of the farm, the one who got second chances before anyone else got a first. When he skipped curfew or came home smelling like beer, Mom said boys needed room to grow. When I asked to go to the movies with a friend, she asked if I was trying to act fast. It didn't take long for me to understand the rules: speak only when spoken to, keep your tone soft, don't outshine Caleb, and above all, don't air the family's dirty laundry. I remember once, in 4th grade, I drew a picture of our family for a class project. Everyone was smiling except me. I gave myself a tiny frown because, even back then, I felt different, muted. When the teacher sent the drawing home, my mom pulled me aside and said, "You embarrassed us. People don't need to know our business." From then on, I kept quiet. I smiled in pictures. I nodded at church. I said yes ma'am and thank you even when my stomach knotted up from the effort. I trained myself to speak in ways that didn't invite judgment. Or worse, attention. Love in our house wasn't unconditional. It came with caveats. If I cleaned the kitchen just right, if I got straight A's, if I didn't talk back or make waves, I got praise. A pat on the back. A sliver of approval. But the moment I slipped, it vanished. There were no beatings. No bruises anyone could see. Just the slow erosion of who I was supposed to be, scrubbed away day by day in a house where silence wasn't just a habit. It was a requirement, and I kept that silence for years, until the day I realized staying quiet was costing me everything. If you'd asked my mom back then who her favorite was, she'd have laughed and said, "I love both my babies equally." But anyone who spent 5 minutes in our house knew the truth: Caleb walked on water. I walked on eggshells. Caleb could wreck Dad's truck, skip chores, and lie straight to our faces, and still get a hug and a second helping of meatloaf. Me? If I left a dish in the sink, I got a half-hour lecture about laziness and setting an example as a young lady. He was the king of the barn, the field, the dinner table. And he knew it, so when things went wrong, and they often did, he didn't worry about consequences. Because I would get them. One evening, after supper, Caleb and I were feeding the goats out back. He was already irritated. Mom had asked him to stay off his phone for 5 minutes, and apparently that was a personal attack. I accidentally bumped the feed bucket, spilling some into the hay. It wasn't a big deal. But to him? It was a target. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he snapped, shoving me back. "You can't do anything right." I stumbled, knocked against the wooden gate, and hit the ground hard. My elbow cracked against a fence post. My jeans tore at the knee. I felt the sting before the blood even came. He didn't apologize. Didn't ask if I was okay. Just muttered something about girls being dramatic and walked off. I limped into the house with dirt on my hands and blood on my jeans. Mom looked up from folding laundry and frowned. What happened to you? Caleb pushed me. In the barn, I said, trying to stay calm. She blinked slowly. Well, you probably provoked him. I spilled some feed. That's all. She didn't say another word. Just turned back to her folding like I wasn't even there. Dad came in a few minutes later. Saw the gash on my knee and raised an eyebrow. Caleb pushed her, I said again, louder this time. Dad rubbed his jaw. You two need to stop riling each other up. He's under pressure. Under pressure. That was their excuse for everything Caleb ever did. The bruise on my arm the next day bloomed purple and yellow. I wore long sleeves to school and told my teacher I fell. I could have told the truth, but what would have changed? No one in town would believe me over Caleb. Not the golden boy. Not the Whitlow son. That night, I sat in bed, the pain in my elbow pulsing like a second heartbeat, and realized something for the first time. If anything ever really happened to me, they'd still find a way to blame me, because in our house, Caleb didn't just walk on water, he could drown me in it, and they'd still call it my fault. By sophomore year, I'd mastered the art of disappearing, not physically. I still showed up to class, did chores, sat at dinner like a ghost in a chair, but emotionally, I faded. Became background. That quiet girl in the second row. The one teachers forgot to call on. The one who smiled with her mouth but never her eyes. At home, I learned silence was safer than truth. If I asked for anything, help with homework, new shoes for gym class, even just a minute to talk, my mom would sigh, press her palm to her forehead, and say, Megan, why are you always so difficult? Difficult. That word stuck to me like mud on church shoes. Meanwhile, Caleb broke curfew, ditched school, and once totaled the four-wheeler racing through the field like an idiot. And somehow, he was just going through a phase. One night, after he told me to shut up at dinner and my parents said nothing, I finally snapped. I pushed my plate away and said, you know, maybe if you actually disciplined him, he wouldn't act like a jerk all the time. The room froze. Caleb chuckled under his breath. Mom's lips thinned to a line. Dad looked up like I'd just spat in his face. Go to your room, he said. And don't bother coming out till you learn some respect. That night, I stared at the ceiling in the dark and realized something. Being quiet had made me invisible. Speaking up had made me disposable. After that, I stopped sharing altogether. I stopped telling Mom when I got an A. I stopped asking Dad to help me fix the squeaky hinge on my window. I stopped talking about books I liked, boys I had crushes on, dreams I had for college. Instead, I started writing in secret. Notes folded into my textbooks. Letters I never sent. I kept a shoebox under my bed full of little pieces of the person I was afraid to be out loud. One of those pieces was a college application, K-State. Manhattan, Kansas. 3 hours away and just far enough to breathe. I picked up the brochure from the school counselor's office and filled it out in pencil first, so I could erase it quickly if someone came into the room. When I was done, I copied it clean in pen and tucked it into a manila envelope. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents, not Caleb, not even the counselor who handed me the packet. I slid it into the bottom of my dresser drawer, beneath a stack of winter socks. It felt dangerous. Like holding a match in a house soaked in gasoline, but it also felt like hope, and in a place like County Road 12, hope was a rebellious act. The acceptance letter came on a Thursday. The envelope was thick and crisp, with the K-State logo printed bold in the corner. I held it in my hands for nearly 10 minutes before opening it, afraid that if I broke the seal, I might break whatever fragile hope I had left. But when I read the words "Congratulations, Megan Whitlow," I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't dance like I thought I would. I just sat on the edge of my bed and breathed, slow. Shaky, because I knew what this letter meant, freedom. For once, I didn't hide it. I told myself I was done with secrets. I deserved this win. So I brought it to the dinner table that night, sliding it across the table like it was a peace offering. What's this? Dad asked, mouth full of meatloaf. I got in, I said. Kansas State. Full admission. I want to go. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. Caleb snorted. What's the point? You gonna major in whining? Mom picked up the letter and read it through, her face unreadable. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were cold. You applied behind our backs? I had to, I said quietly. You never would have let me. Her lips trembled, more rage than hurt. After everything we've done for you, this is how you thank us? Running away like some, it's not running away, I cut in. It's moving forward. That was the mistake. Speaking like I had a choice, Dad slammed his fork down. You're not going anywhere. You hear me? We're not paying for some liberal brainwashing factory just so you can come back thinking you're better than us. I'll get loans. Over my dead body, he snapped. Mom pushed her chair back and stood. You think this family is something you can just walk away from? You think people won't talk? What are they going to say when you don't show up at church? When they hear our daughter ran off like trash? That word hit me like a slap. I left the letter on the table and went to my room, shutting the door before they could say anything worse. My hands were shaking, my heart hammering. I'd always known they'd resist, but I didn't expect this. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I stepped quietly into the hallway, past Caleb's door, toward the kitchen where a thin strip of light glowed under the door. I heard Mom's voice. Low. Tight. She won't ruin us. Not after everything. If she keeps pushing, I'll shut her down. I always do. I stood frozen in the dark, a chill crawling up my spine. I wasn't just unwanted, I was a threat to the version of the family they wanted the world to see, and they were willing to bury me in silence to keep it. I didn't sleep after hearing that phone call. I lay awake in the dark, my thoughts turning over like a thunderstorm on the horizon. She won't ruin us. I'll shut her down. I always do. Those words kept echoing, bouncing off the walls of my chest until they hurt. I had no clue what my mother was capable of, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't willing to wait and find out. I left before sunrise. I packed a duffel bag with just enough clothes, toothbrush, the college letter folded into my journal, and $64 I'd been hiding in a cereal box since Christmas. I left the house through the laundry room door, careful not to step on the creaky third board of the porch. By 6 a.m., I was walking down County Road 12 with my thumb out, heart pounding like a jackhammer. It took 2 rides to get to Cotton Creek, a tiny town an hour east with a gas station, a diner, and, most importantly, a mental health clinic I'd found online in the library weeks earlier. I didn't even know if they'd see me. I didn't have insurance, or an appointment, or a clue what I was doing, but I had nothing left to lose. I must have looked like hell when I walked in, muddy shoes, tear-streaked face, hands shaking. The woman at the front desk blinked at me, then gently asked, "Are you safe?" It was the first time in years someone asked me something that wasn't loaded with judgment. I nodded, but just barely. Within 10 minutes, I was in a small office with warm yellow walls and soft lighting. A woman named Dr. Lacey Monroe sat across from me, notepad in her lap, no judgment in her eyes. She didn't ask me to explain everything right away. She just said, "Tell me what's heavy." And for the first time, I did. It poured out, how my brother got away with everything. How my parents twisted the truth until I didn't trust my own memory, how silence was safer than honesty in our house, and how they treated my dreams like threats. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. She just nodded and said, "That wasn't normal. That wasn't love." I started crying so hard I couldn't speak. Not because I was sad, though I was, but because no one had ever said that to me before. Not a teacher, not a pastor, not a friend. It was like she reached in and flipped on a light in a room I didn't even know I'd been living in. That day, we made a plan: housing, financial aid. A way out that didn't involve going back, not ever. It would take time, but I was finally moving toward something, not just running from it. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I wasn't lost. I was finding myself. Dr. Lacey Monroe didn't fix me overnight. She didn't give me a list of answers or tell me how to feel. What she gave me was space. And a question I couldn't stop thinking about: who would you be if you hadn't grown up surviving? At first, I didn't know how to answer that. I didn't even know where to start. But week by week, in that small office with the yellow walls and the sound machine humming in the corner, I started peeling back layers I didn't know I had. We talked about things I'd only whispered to myself in the dark: how I felt invisible, guilty for wanting more, terrified that leaving made me ungrateful. She introduced words like gaslighting and enmeshment, and explained that love wasn't supposed to feel like control. That my mother's silence wasn't my fault. That my father's passivity didn't mean I imagined the pain. Families like yours don't need fists to cause damage, she said once. They just need fear, confusion, and rules no one writes down. That hit harder than any bruise I ever had. We mapped out how emotional abuse works, how people like my mom make you doubt your own voice until you only echo theirs. How they rewrite memories, punish independence, and call it love. It was terrifying. But it was also the most freeing thing I'd ever learned. I wasn't broken. I was conditioned. Dr. Monroe helped me shift from survival mode into something that looked like strength. Real strength, not keeping quiet to keep the peace, but finally learning how to speak. We got practical too. She connected me with a legal aid group that specialized in family coercion. Helped me set up a safe mailing address for school correspondence. Even walked me through applying for emergency student housing and financial aid. I remember sitting in her office, holding the printed form from Kansas State, and saying, "Is it selfish to leave?" She looked at me with the calm that only comes from seeing pain hundreds of times before and said, "No. It's survival to want something better." So I started planning. Quietly. Carefully, I contacted the school. Let them know I was in a unique situation and needed to move into early student housing. I saved every dime from a part-time job bussing tables at a diner near the clinic. I opened a checking account in my own name. I built my escape with quiet, steady hands. No more asking permission. No more waiting for them to see me. I was done being their shadow. The day I mailed my housing deposit, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I felt steady. Like something inside me had finally stopped shaking, because for the first time in my life, I had a plan that didn't end in silence. I left home the same way I'd survived it, quietly, no fireworks. No final confrontation. Just one last walk down County Road 12, duffel bag slung over my shoulder, and the sun barely rising over the wheat fields. The gravel crunched under my boots like it had 1,000 times before, only this time I wasn't looking back. Dr. Monroe met me at the Cotton Creek bus stop. She didn't ask if I was scared. She knew I was. Instead, she said, "You're allowed to feel brave and terrified at the same time." And I did. Kansas State's early student housing welcomed me like a second chance. A dorm room with peeling paint and a creaky mattress felt like a castle. No one yelled. No one accused. I could breathe without checking the air first, but my freedom didn't go unnoticed back home. The first call came from a neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, who used to buy eggs from us. She left a voicemail dripping with concern. "Your mama says you're not well, sweetheart. That you're going through something. You know they're just worried sick." Then came the whispers. My mom told people I'd fallen into a bad crowd and gotten caught up in lies about trauma. My dad said I was too sensitive, not herself, needing help. Caleb? He just laughed to anyone who'd listen. Said I was off chasing attention like some sad drama queen who couldn't handle real life. The town believed them, of course they did. I was the quiet one. The rule follower. The one who never made a fuss. Now I was the girl who ran off without saying goodbye, accusing her family of things that sounded too subtle to be real. But I didn't go back, not when Pastor Rick called to ask if I'd reconsider counseling with the family. Not when Mom emailed to say I was breaking her heart. Not even when Caleb posted a picture on Facebook of my empty chair at Thanksgiving, captioned, "Some people forget where they come from." I knew exactly where I came from. That's why I left. I spent nights crying, yes. But I also slept without clutching my phone under my pillow like a lifeline. I walked to class with my head high, even if it still felt like a lie some days. I journaled. I worked at a bookstore off campus. I kept going to therapy. And I reminded myself every morning, leaving doesn't make you weak. Surviving does. The stories they told about me? I let them go. Because for the first time I had a new story. One where I wasn't the villain, or the burden, or the disappointment. I was the author, and I wasn't going to rewrite myself for anyone. I didn't plan to write the essay, not at first. 4 months, I just lived. Attended class. Went to work. Slept through the night without flinching. Healing isn't a straight line, but it started to feel like one with fewer bruises, but the words kept building inside me. Everything I hadn't said for 18 years. Everything they'd told me to bury. One afternoon, sitting in the student union with my laptop open and half a cup of cold coffee beside me, it poured out. I wrote for hours. My fingers didn't pause. I didn't cry. I didn't edit, I just told the truth, not the names. Not the address. But the moments, the silence at the dinner table, the bruise in the barn, the way love was used like a leash. I wrote about being erased in plain sight. About how therapy didn't fix me, but it gave me tools to rebuild from the wreckage. When I submitted it to the Cotton County Ledger, I expected a polite rejection, or worse, nothing. Instead, the editor emailed me that same night. He called it powerful, necessary, and deeply courageous. Said it would run in Sunday's paper. Said people needed to hear it. He was right. By Monday morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Old classmates, neighbors, even 2 of my former teachers. Was that about your family? I always knew something wasn't right at that house. Your bravery means more than you know. But not everyone was so kind. Caleb posted on Facebook again, this time not so subtle. Funny how some people get bored and invent trauma for attention. My mother sent me a single message, "You've made a fool of us." And yet, for the first time, the town didn't rally behind her. The lady who ran the church bake sale whispered about the way my mom once humiliated me for wearing mascara. The mechanic who fixed Dad's truck remembered how Caleb screamed at me in the waiting room when I was 13. Whispers grew louder. The image they'd worked so hard to maintain began to crack. People stopped inviting them to events. My parents, once pillars of the community, suddenly found themselves under a microscope they couldn't control. And me? I breathed. The story was no longer just mine to carry. It echoed through other survivors. Girls who wrote me saying, "I thought I was alone." Women who emailed, "You gave words to something I couldn't name." I didn't write the essay to get revenge, but I won't lie, watching the town finally see through the act, that was its own kind of justice. And maybe, just maybe, that little girl inside me, the one who drew frowns in family portraits and hid her dreams in drawers, finally felt seen. I stood behind the podium, palms slightly damp, breath steady. The conference room wasn't huge, maybe 50 folding chairs, some half-empty water bottles, a plate of untouched cookies near the back, but to me, it felt like a cathedral. "Hi," I began, voice clear, no tremble. "My name is Megan Whitlow, and I used to believe that being silent kept me safe." The words felt familiar now. Not rehearsed, just worn in, like jeans that once chafed and now fit perfectly. I shared my story, not in gruesome detail, but in the truths that mattered: emotional abuse, the slow poison of control disguised as love, and the way therapy, real, hard, honest therapy, had peeled back everything they told me I wasn't allowed to be. When I finished, there was a moment of stillness. Then, quiet applause. I stepped off the stage, heart full, not with pride in performance, but in peace. In power. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was seen, not for what I survived, but for who I'd become. As the room thinned out, a girl approached. 16, maybe 17. Hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands, eyes like mine used to be, half hopeful, half braced for disappointment. Your story," she said softly, "it sounded a lot like mine." I smiled gently. "Then I'm really glad you were here." She nodded, eyes shining. "No one's ever said it out loud like that before. That families can hurt you without hitting." That you can love them and still leave. I wanted to hug her. I didn't. I just said, you deserve safety. And freedom. And your own story. She smiled, a small one. But real, that night, back in my tiny apartment, rented on my own. Decorated with secondhand plants and photos of the life I built brick by brick, I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself cry. Not the broken kind. Not the I don't know what to do kind, the I made it kind. I used to carry shame like a second skin. Used to wonder if maybe I had made it all up. That maybe I was the problem. But therapy stripped away their lies and handed me a mirror I could trust. Now, I go to sleep knowing who I am, a woman who walked away from silence, a daughter who survived, a sister who forgave but did not forget, a voice they tried to mute, now speaking for those still finding theirs. I don't hate them, not anymore. I don't need to. My life no longer belongs to their approval. Or their church friends, or the stories they spin at town potlucks. It belongs to me, and I'm proud of the girl who didn't stay silent. If Megan's story struck a chord with you, don't keep it to yourself, share this video to help others feel seen. Comment below if you've ever felt silenced or broken by the people meant to protect you. Let's build a space where truth is heard. Subscribe for more powerful stories.